Ms. Du said there was no need. If I have accepted this position, I will try my best and take as much responsibility as possible. I will listen to what Mr. Lee has to say. After hearing Mr. Lee's words, Ms. Du was astonished. In the hospital, she had been looking for information about this club, but she didn't expect their system to be so well developed. This is the task Mr. Lee gave me, and it's also an opportunity for me to show my talent. If I can't answer completely, I might be considered second-rate. Ms. Du said, "Indeed, I have a few thoughts as follows. At present, the club's development direction is quite correct. Whether it's about development direction or longevity, these two main factors cannot be changed. But there are loopholes in the details. First of all, we need to build a framework for the organization. What we are going to do now is to reorganize the name, member system, and staff. We need to clarify the club's policy, including its principles and the structure of the club, which includes cognitive structure, membership system, and admission terms. Inviting members, all of this can be called culture, the core of the club. I think the club has a future, but it must also have a past. So we need to create a system that shows how the club has developed or emerged over thousands of years. This will provide a solid foundation for outsiders looking at the club." After hearing Ms. Du's thoughts, Mr. Lee thought he had indeed found the right person. She is indeed a professor who studies organizations and human relations, and her thoughts are very deep. Just based on her thoughts just now, she could pass the test. At this point, Ms. Du made her suggestion about inviting members, which could also be changed a bit. Previously, the way to join the club was for you to sell them longevity and then invite them in. We can choose one person from among them as the center to come to them and provide information about the club and their world. For example, if a pill can prolong life, they can experience it directly. Or we can choose more members. Hearing this suggestion, Mr. Lee thought that having a representative would save energy and speed up the process compared to the old way. Mr. Lee thought this suggestion was very good. Then Ms. Du continued talking about buying longevity. She wanted to invite Dr. The and Anthony to join in and see if it was feasible. Mr. Lee with his glasses on said, "For example, let Ms. Du adjust her state and ask you with Professor Anthony's knowledge and Dr. The's ability plus your ability, can we create a time bank?" Mr. Lee wants to create a new world again, then freely take time from them just now. Ms. Du's idea of creating a time bank surprised Mr. Lee very much. If you could be bolder, could you use time to create a new world? Hearing this, Mr. Lee was stunned that her thoughts were exactly like his own. Ms. Du continued, "I think that many years later, when the club is strong enough, we probably won't need to hide anymore. Even openly, within the world scope, we can create a public time bank. With the whole world, we will buy time. Everyone can choose to sell their lifespan to us, thus getting money. Of course, these assumptions all need to create a contract with detailed terms and conditions." Mr. Lee was very interested in this time bank. At this point, Dr. The and Anthony also joined. Ms. Du asked them, "With our current technical conditions, can we simulate a miniature sandbox of the Earth when it was first born?" Both Dr. The and Anthony were sweating at this thought. Ms. Du continued, "With our current genetic technology, along with bioengineering techniques, we might be able to encode a spore with a certain evolutionary direction. Could we open an evolutionary path for some creatures?" Anthony said this was not practical, while Dr. The said, "This thought is a bit too bold." At this point, Mr. Lee said, "Now I am very hopeful and authorize you two to analyze this matter. Can you come up with a feasible plan? This impractical explanation won't do." Dr. The and Anthony looked at each other. Anthony spoke first. "The main elements that make up life appeared 6.6 billion years ago. After the Big Bang of the banking system, it created nitrogen and sulfur buffers, which were the first things to create life 3.8 billion years ago. On Earth, a stable geo formed and then began to give birth to the largest life-bearing entity. In the long time that followed, there was a complex evolutionary process in theory. In case there are conditions like Earth's, as long as we gather leading experts in all fields, we can simulate a small-sized sandbox. Dr. The believed that creating an evolving spore is a sacred field. Each person's genetic code determines everything about us. Through genetic coding techniques, we must be careful with life. But theoretically, indeed we can make this sandbox. After hearing Antony and Dr. The's analysis, Ms. Du put forward her thoughts. So when the conditions are ripe, can we create a suitable starting environment for life in this sandbox? Then through Mr. Lee's acceleration of time, create a group of miniature life forms. At that time, Mr. Lee will be the creator of this miniature world and can freely take time from those creatures. In other words, Mr. Lee can create time. Hearing this thought, Antony said it was too crazy while Dr. The calmly said, but this plan can still be implemented. Mr. Lee, on the side, thought that this plan was very difficult. But when building a high-end laboratory, gathering experts from various fields together to try, plus his own time ability, the slow evolutionary process could end in a blink of an eye. Creating a perfect ecological environment world, he could take time from them, turning them into his own time bank. If it could really be implemented, then he would have infinite time in the future. Mr. Lee named this crazy plan as the World Creation Plan. Mr. Lee declared, this plan to create a world will become one of the core goals of the club. Before completing the plan, it will become the club's top priority task. All of us must strive for this goal. Second, the Black Technology Plan and the Bioengineering Project Plan are on par with each other. Start fundraising first. The club will provide the largest fund support. Hearing this, Dr. The and Antony were excited. The last project is the Earth Environmental Protection Plan. All tasks must not destroy the environment, hoping in the long days to come to create a world that humans cannot achieve, and open up a new world. The meeting ended. Antony walked out still shocked. This plan is too bold. Dr. The laughed and said, if it was before, I might think like you. But now I can fully accept Mr. Lee's plan. We were originally two old men about to die, but now we can still stand here and discuss. For someone who can control life and death, what is impossible? Hearing this, Antony turned his head to look at Mr. Lee. Is this Mr. Lee a god who measures the world? At this point, Ms. Du asked Mr. Lee, if I am now a member of the club, do I need to give up all my social relationships? Mr. Lee said it was not necessary. Her situation was different from Dr. The's. It's fine as it is. Also, bring Hien Veen here tomorrow. She has been recognized now. I will extend Hien Veen's lifespan. Hearing Mr. Lee say this, Ms. Du breathed a sigh of relief. At this point, Mr. Lee wanted to discuss the representative position with her. Mr. Lee took out a set of documents and said, these are documents about my friends. You could say they are my main clients now. Before, I also thought about choosing one of them as a representative, but I kept hesitating. But now with your help, I can be more relaxed. After all, professional matters should be left to professionals. Ms. Du, what do you think? After Ms. Du finished reading the documents, she chose Mr. Vin because he is very famous both domestically and internationally, has a wide range of relationships and his words carry weight. Under the current conditions, he is the best person, but the specific situation still needs to meet the real person. Mr. Lee was very satisfied with her carefulness in work. He said, from now on, personnel matters will be handled by you. Then Mr. Lee intended to transfer power to her while the most important time would still be held in his hands, thus consolidating his own position. The scene shifted to Mr. Vin's house 2 days later, where Mr. Lai planned to hold a birthday party and invited Mr. Vin to participate. But it seemed they cared more about Mr. Vin's health. Mr. Vin laughed and said, he must be curious about what kind of elixir I ate to be like this. The man next to him said, or let's refuse on the pretext after all the identity of Mr. Lee. Mr. Vin said no, so it will make them more suspicious. At this point, Damien Knock called, wanting him to come to the club base. Once he hung up, Mr. Vin was suspicious. If it was a normal task, then Mr. Lee would report in the group. This was the first time he called them over. The man next to him panicked and said, "Don't tell me we met the Tran family, so they want to punish us. If he gets angry, will we end up like Chao Han Duong?" Mr. Vin said he had sent all the content of his conversation with the two Tran brothers to Mr. Lee. Then, in his heart, he would calculate whether it was a disaster or a blessing. "Just go, and you'll know." Seeing that Mr. Vin came so quickly, Mr. Lee was very satisfied. Then he introduced him to Ms. Du, saying, "This is Professor Ms. Du, she is the new advisor of the Longevity Club." Ms. Du greeted Mr. Vin, saying, "I've heard your name for a long time, now that I meet you in person, I'm very honored." Mr. Vin looked at Ms. Du, realizing that her knowledge and understanding were not like her external age. Then they started some polite conversation. Mr. Lee watched them talk and thought, good generals are eloquent and thoughtful. Knowing that he was dealing with an old monster in business, every sentence they said had no loopholes, full of probing but not losing politeness. Indeed, it was a high-level art. At this point Ms. Du signaled to Mr. Lee. He understood right away. He called Mr. Vin. "This time I invited you here actually because there is a very important task that I want to entrust to you." Hearing Mr. Lee say this, Mr. Vin knew he was getting into the main topic. Mr. Lee continued with, "Mr. Vin, do you want to represent the Vin family as the representative of the Longevity Club?" Hearing that Mr. Lee wanted him to be the diplomatic representative of the club, Mr. Vin was very surprised. Ms. Du explained, "Because the Vin family has been very influential in recent years, we chose you. We will give you a laboratory, which can be considered as a representative office, and at the same time announce to the outside world that the club's main goal is to research life-extending technology. Your task is to start advertising some nutritional medicines and various drinks on suitable occasions. These medicines can all extend lifespan, and they are exclusive products researched and developed by your laboratory." Mr. Lee thought he would readily agree, but Mr. Vin was silent for a while, then said, "I understand. This is a business with huge benefits. I can understand Ms. Du's intention, which is basically to let the Vin family attract a number of potential customers on behalf of you, then select potential customers and bring them to you." Mr. Lee said, "That's right, this is the job of a representative. What do you think?" Mr. Vin laughed and thanked Mr. Lee for his trust, but for this position, he needed to think about it. Mr. Vin's intention was clearly to refuse. Mr. Lee was puzzled by this answer. Ms. Du said next to him, "Actually, we didn't just choose you, because Mr. Lee strongly recommended you, mainly because of the historical background of the Vin family and your lifetime of business experience." At this point, Mr. Lee stood up and said, "Mr. Vin, speaking from a personal perspective, I still hope you will accept this position. After all, I want someone I trust for the future development of the club." But Mr. Vin really feels embarrassed. "I can understand that too, you don't need to worry too much." Ms. Du said she would contact other candidates. At this point Mr. Vin laughed and said, "Indeed, I am short-sighted and did not understand Mr. Lee's painstaking kindness. If you don't mind, then I hope you will entrust me with this representative position. I will definitely not let down your expectations." With this answer Mr. Lee smiled and said, "Then I hope Mr. Vin will work harder in the future." After Mr. Vin left, Mr. Lee breathed a sigh of relief. He thought Mr. Vin would happily agree to accept it, but he still had to persuade Ms. Du. Couldn't help but sigh. He is indeed experienced. But when he saw the benefits, he immediately agreed. So we have to see if this person is trustworthy and whether he can participate in the club's affairs as a representative. If he can't stand firm in front of interests, then for us this kind of person is also a disaster. Mr. Vin has always balanced between profit and harm in his life. His way of dealing with people is also like doing business. A free meal can make the buyer really feel at ease. In reality, there must be give and take to truly become sincere. He wants Mr. Lee to feel at ease entrusting this position to him. Hearing Ms. Do's analysis, Mr. Lee felt that he was indeed cunning. At this point, Ms. Do made her suggestion: the club's strong development will lead to government officials' attention, which is a large part hidden under the ice. So we must establish a secret department for the club to continue developing secretly with this base. Mr. Lee felt that the suggestion to set up a secret base was very good. At this point, at Chow's house in Beijing, the police had noticed Mr. Lee, so they sent an investigator from their department. Seeing the investigator, Chow Hanjiang was so nervous that he couldn't speak fluently. The girl said straight out, "We came to find you because we want an item, specifically a videotape." Hearing this, Chow Hanjiang panicked. The girl continued that the videotape was from the day his younger brother was killed. Chow Hanjiang broke out in a cold sweat. "How do they know? Did someone leak it?" The girl sternly said, "Don't pretend anymore, you are actually very panicked." Chow Hanjiang heard this and pretended to be calm. The girl threatened, "If you continue to hide, it may involve your family." Chow Hanjiang was helpless and could only take out the tape. The girl took the tape and left. Seeing this, Chow Hanjiang quickly cut off relations with them. The girl turned her head and said, "Rest assured, Mr. Chow, we just want to know the truth, we are not interested in what you guys do." Looking at the departing figure of the group, Chow Hanjiang was still shocked and scared. Unexpectedly, his brother's affair had touched the Department of Zero. Chow Hanjiang suddenly thought, this is also good. There are friends in the Department of Zero. I don't have to do it myself. At this time the person in charge of the Department of Zero received the videotape. There is evidence now, only witnesses are missing. Then they found two guests of Mr. Lee. They were respectively sanitation worker Tran Ngoc Bin and taxi driver Ta Dai Hai. The man interrogated Ta Dai Hai, "We investigated that a few months ago your account suddenly received 1.3500.000 NDT. Can you explain its source?" Ta Dai Hai was shocked and said, "I have signed an agreement and cannot speak." Hearing about the agreement, the person in charge immediately sent his subordinates to ask Tran Ngoc Bin similar questions. Tran Ngoc Bin said, "I don't know anything at all, I just want my son to have enough money to study abroad." The girl threw documents on the table. Her son lied to her that he had registered for a study abroad exam when in fact he used that money to indulge in pleasure. After seeing what her son did, Tran Ngoc Bin cried and muttered, "Why did he deceive me? I sold my life for him." The person in charge saw this and started interrogating them again. After the investigation was over, the person in charge of the Department of Zero called a meeting. Before the meeting started, Lu Chuandong asked everyone to sign a confidentiality order. Hearing this, colleagues felt a bit too much. The man next to him said, "I have read this report already. The evidence all shows that it is a revenge killing. Solving the case is just a matter of time." Lu Chuandong pushed his glasses and said, "I have a tape that has never been made public. It is a tape that records the scene where Chow Han Duong was killed that day. Let's talk after watching this." At this point, in the club, Mr. Lee and Ms. Du were discussing the development of the club. Robert said, "Mr. Lee, I'm afraid we're in big trouble this time. Someone is investigating us on a large scale. The target is all customers who have ever sold longevity. Their accounts all show signs of being investigated because that money is not commensurate with their salary. The most important thing is that these people were all questioned at the same time. What's terrifying is that the time difference is not more than 2 minutes." Hearing this, Mr. Lee asked who was investigating us. Any clues? Robert panicked and said these people don't exist at all. Hearing this, Mr. Lee understood if even Robert couldn't crack it, then the police had noticed us. Ms. Du asked who are they. Mr. Lee sighed and said, "The day has come because I was too careless from the beginning. I didn't think about hiding myself because I was very small then, but now it's different. Once noticed by the secret department, not only will my information be dug up, but if not handled quickly, I'm afraid it will involve my staff." Mr. Lee suddenly remembered something. This investigation may be related to Chao Han Duong. Hearing about Chao Han Duong, Ms. Du was startled. Mr. Lee said it needs to be done. Even though it's against the rules, I stubbornly carried out this matter. The consequences were obvious. Hearing Mr. Lee say that, Ms. Du thought to herself, if it was a psychic saying that, there could be a way to solve the problem. Then she spoke her mind. Even though this matter had been exposed to the public, it would surely attract the attention of special departments. I feel that this is a good opportunity for us to develop. After hearing what Mr. Lee said, my thoughts were similar to hers. No matter what, the police will not let us go. From the laboratory to the company, all are subject to their approval and support. We can be at ease. To develop here, we must rely on a peaceful and tranquil environment. So I have only one goal, which is to cooperate with the police. As for those threats, even if they are not suitable for use, we must hold them in our hands. The Zero Department is watching a video of the scene where Chao Han Duong was killed earlier. This dog is fine. A second later it died. The process took less than a second. Everyone was shocked after watching it. Lu Chuandong said that was the entire content of the videos. We discovered something very special and temporarily called it a. Next, we will slow down S by 10 times. After slowing down by 10 times, a figure appeared in the videos. Until the videos were slowed down by 64 times, the back of the murderer appeared in the videos. Everyone couldn't believe what they saw when they saw this scene. At this time, Lu Chuandong said that he had already verified that he had contacted several normal people and also had transactions. It is possible that it can control time and trade it. Although we don't know what his intention is to buy time, we have to say that he is very generous in his shots. The two interrogated people may not want to reveal his information because they received a large amount of money. Of course, it may also be due to the power of the covenant. Although I don't understand why this ability is on, it really happened. You who are present here are the highest level experts in various fields of society. The purpose of calling everyone here today is to describe a personality traits and attitude with everyone. I need to know whether A's impact on society is beneficial or harmful, whether it is beneficial to us or not, whether it can be eliminated from this world or not. The man explained. Hearing this, someone spoke up. I think this is not a question of difficulty or not, but impossibility. If it can trade lifespan, then there is a high probability, he continued. He may be able to see the remaining lifespan of human beings because he inferred that when elements that could affect his life appeared, he could clearly feel whether these customers were always under his surveillance or not. Lu Chuandong did not rule out this possibility, but when we contacted those customers, it did not act. The man watched the video again and we made a hypothesis about the movement state of this person under the condition that nothing was cut in the video. If he is here now, Chief Lu, can you and your special forces defeat him? The man asked. Hearing this, Lu Chuandong was dumbfounded. The man continued, this is the intersection of two types of time, we can't touch it. Let alone defeat him now. An old bald man also expressed his opinion. Recently, a scholar proposed a concept of superfrequency thinking, which is to transmit information to human nerves at a very fast speed in a special way. From this, a state of superfrequency thinking is achieved, the speed of thinking increases, that is, the surrounding time will decrease. It can be said to be a variant form of prolonging lifespan, so it leads to speculation whether the collection of thoughts belongs to a high-level civilization or not, and A's ability is similar to this. The difference between high-level civilization and low-level civilization lies in technology or destructive power. In short, this ability can easily control everything and silently destroy our existence. Now we use all the techniques to destroy it, but when it has accelerated time by 100 times, we are standing still. From a certain angle, it can be said that we have no resistance. This is a one-sided war, the man concluded. Lu Chuandong said, so your opinion is not to regard it as an enemy. The bald man is right, unless we also have similar abilities and resistance. Otherwise, we cannot restrain the other party. We can probe the other party's attitude first, if it is possible to develop him into our alliance. Isn't it better than making enemies? When the meeting ended, Lu Chuandong was about to send out the content of this meeting when he received a call from the bureau chief. Hearing that there was no need for further investigation, Lu Chuandong was very impressed. It was so hard and exhausting, but now it had to be transferred to others. The old ladder only needed to make a phone call and the Zero department investigated. Mr. Lee had to stop. Mr. Lee was very surprised that Dr. The knew someone from the secret investigation team. Ms. Du said that Dr. The had many acquaintances, and with Dr. The as a contact point, we didn't have to worry about anything anymore. Mr. Lee worried about Dr. The's current identity being different and whether it would lead to unnecessary troubles. But after seeing Ms. Du smile, Mr. Lee was relieved. That's right, that's the most secure department anyway. At this time Dr. The called Mr. Lee back. Mr. Lee, this person wants to talk to you. Ms. Du reminded him that this conversation was not natural and he should cherish it. Mr. Lee said he understood and took the phone to start probing. The man laughed and said, "Hello Mr. Lee, we have heard about you for a long time." Mr. Lee said, "I've been living very quietly recently and you still hear about me." The man asked back, "Really?" "I heard from the other party." Mr. Lee thought that indeed because of Chao Han Duong's matter they paid attention. At this time the man said, "As we see it, there are 3 types of people in this world: smart people, fools and ordinary people. Mr. Lee, we are very curious about which type you belong to." Mr. Lee thought for a while, then turned his head to look at Dr. The and Ms. Du, then said, "Although I'm not the type who admits I'm smart, but I'm also not a fool or traitor." Hearing this answer the man laughed. "Mr. Lee, you are a very strange person. I have a question I am very curious about. If we challenge you, what percentage do you think you will win?" Mr. Lee said, "I haven't thought about this issue, but obviously, this is a war that is both laborious and strenuous." Speaking of waste, Mr. Lee asked the other party directly, "Do you need me to give you some time?" The man laughed. "Mr. Lee, you are very funny. But let's talk about the main thing now." Very quickly after that, Mr. Lee knew that he had reached a general agreement with the police. After hanging up, Mr. Lee sighed. "I have reached 4 agreements with the police. First, we will not disrupt the normal order of society. The other party will not interfere with our development. Second, facing members appearing with new identities, they will provide new legal identities. Third, if our news is known by a third party, they will be responsible for refuting and erasing related news. Fourth, perhaps what I am most interested in, related to the biochemistry and physics laboratory, the club can directly apply for establishment. They will definitely approve it." Hearing this good news, Old Tang and Ms. Du were very happy. Mr. Lee said, "But all these things are conditional. It's not easy to hug an official's leg. When we have new research results, we have to give them priority." After hearing this, Ms. Du said that this is also good. Peaceful coexistence is what we want. Now we just need to stabilize and take one step at a time. In this way, the club can develop steadily in the country for a short time and we don't need to worry about anything anymore. At this time, Mr. Lee thought that although he had proved his existence in front of the police, mutual exploration, mutual respect and mutual benefit must be respected and implemented carefully. This is the principle of longevity in people's lives. Then Mr. Lee told Ms. Du to inform Vin's family that they could start working. The noble old man must join the club, but there will be many eyes watching them, so they can't rush it and tell Vin's family about it. The first step is to continue exploiting Shanghai. Ms. Du said, "I understand." Then he called Old Thing back and said that the club must welcome a new student. After solving the police side of things, Mr. Lee went to Dr. The's laboratory. He said that after many experimental studies he finally made the medicine Mr. Lee requested. This is an empty worm shrinking medicine made from biological materials. After drinking it will neither benefit nor harm and will not be digested. It will be fixed on the stomach so it cannot be excreted. After hearing Dr. Lee's introduction, Mr. Lee said, "It's perfect." Then he used his ability to increase the time of the pill by 5 times and decrease the surrounding time by 5 times. The scope is very small, so after separating it was quickly swallowed back by the outside speed of time. Mr. Lee was completely assured of Dr. Lee's loyalty, but to get the loyalty of outside employees, money alone was never enough. There had to be a small threat so that core members and outsiders would drink this harmless medicine. Normally it will not have any effect on the body, but once there is betrayal behavior, Mr. Lee only needs to reduce the range and time of this pill. It will suck up organ cells in a short time, becoming the strongest poison. At this time Mr. Lee called Dr. Lee back. "I want to meet your 3 newest assistants." Mr. Lee quickly met them. Mr. Lee said, "You guys have been here for a while now. You probably noticed something unusual about this lab. As for Dr. Lee's identity, you guys must also be suspicious." Hearing Mr. Lee say this, Dr. Nan sweated, although he always suspected, but this matter Mr. Lee just said it straight out. Then Mr. Lee pushed his glasses and said, "You all need to carefully consider what I'm about to say. This could potentially affect your future and your lives. I have 3 pills in my hand, and you can choose whether or not to take them. If you have never betrayed anyone, these pills are completely harmless. Of course, we are not using them to limit your lives, they are just a test of your loyalty. However, if you have done something you shouldn't have, these pills will become extremely toxic. Those who choose to take the pill will have their salaries doubled and may be promoted to represent the laboratory, gaining the rights of a representative. At the same time, they will be qualified to work on the development of the elixir of life. Those who choose not to take the pill can continue working at the company, but they will not be considered core employees. Given Dr. Lee's status, it's certainly inappropriate for him to put his name on those illustrious patents, so he will delegate that authority to the representative. Therefore, the representative will gain immense prestige and may even receive international awards. These are things that are hard for people to refuse. Now, you 3 can give your answers." The 3 of them looked at the pill for a moment. Dr. Chu, standing next to them, stood up and agreed. Mr. Lee extended his hand and said, "Please." Dr. Ku took the pill without hesitation and swallowed it. Dr. Chu was stunned by this. At this point, Dr. Nan also stood up and agreed. The old man was very pleased. Then, Dr. Nan swallowed the pill. Seeing the 2 of them take it, Dr. Chu thought they were crazy. At this point, Mr. Lee called him over. "Dr. Chu. Everyone else has made their choice, what about you? Swallow this pill and you can double your salary and achieve great accomplishments." Dr. Ku and Nan didn't hesitate at all and swallowed it down. Dr. Chu found it very suspicious because he came here for a high salary and didn't expect this to happen. Betrayal would turn into poison in this world? How could there be such a thing? They're just trying to scare us, right? Seeing his reaction, Mr. Lee laughed and said, "It's okay, you decide for yourself, we won't force anyone." Looking at the pill in Mr. Lee's hand, Dr. Chu was sure that they wanted them to take it so they could control them and monopolize their future research results. Those 2 were really brave to trust others so easily. Thinking about this, Dr. Chu smirked. "Let them be the guinea pigs first is fine too, as long as I have talent, won't there be opportunities in the future?" At this point, Mr. Lee asked him, "What is your decision?" Dr. Chu replied, "I'm sorry, I just want to earn money to support my family, as for other things, I'm afraid I don't have that kind of courage." Hearing his words, Dr. Lee was also surprised. He didn't expect anyone would refuse. Dr. Chu was embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Professor, I've disappointed you." Then he said to Mr. Lee, "Can I still continue working here?" Mr. Lee said of course he could, but he wouldn't be allowed in Lab 1 anymore. After that, Ms. Du asked Mr. Lee, "Why did you kick him out of Lab 1? Mr. Lee explained, "I welcome talents who serve me, but he has refused me. It's only natural that I ask him to leave the central area. It's a fair deal." Hearing Mr. Lee say this, Ms. Du thought it was good too. After all, our work must be kept strictly confidential. Anyone who doesn't do well in enlightenment work certainly won't be valued. Mr. Lee explained, "Now we're not hiding anymore. Facing external development, such things will continue happening. Perhaps those who are watching us won't decrease but increase instead." Ms. Du quickly expressed her opinion. "From now on, we need to train a team that works in secret, or you could say, operates in the shadows day and night. We will find a base abroad and secretly develop talent. In the light of day, we must ensure our survival. We cannot be too conspicuous. We must maintain a moderate profile. Moreover, since we have now exposed ourselves to the police, I suggest you form a special task force and use your abilities to enhance their capabilities in a short time." Mr. Lee felt this suggestion was very good, using the time room to create a team, but only when these people swallow the pill can they start training. Mr. Lee suddenly thought about buying time. This also needs to be accelerated, increasing the amount of time in stock, not only to meet the needs of those guests but more importantly for his own ability development. At this point, Ms. Du reminded Mr. Lee of something else. It's time to call the Vin family to start recruiting members. With mutual benefits, they will certainly be happy to help. Mr. Lee said, "Okay, how are they preparing during this period?" Ms. Du laughed and said, "Just one word from you, and they can start tonight." Mr. Lee said, "Great, let's get started." After receiving Mr. Lee's order, Mr. Vin began to do the representative's work. Today the Vin family welcomed 2 distinguished guests. Seeing the guests arrive, Mr. Vin went up enthusiastically to greet Mr. Vong. "It's been a long time since we last met. It's been several years since our last meeting, hasn't it?" The 2 guests don't blame us, Ma Don and Vong Chinhua. Seeing Mr. Vin so enthusiastic, they were very shocked. "What's going on? He doesn't look like he's seriously ill at all." Then the 3 of them exchanged pleasantries. Vong Chinhua said, "Seeing you so healthy makes me feel at ease, Mr. Vin. I heard before that you were seriously ill." Mr. Vin said, "Is that so? Life is like a string of a musical instrument. Once it breaks, it's over. That seems like it just happened yesterday. We're not young anymore. Let's meet as much as we can. Who knows, one day we might not be able to meet again." Seeing Mr. Vin so spirited, Vong Chinhua voiced his doubts. "Mr. Vin, we are all people who are closer to Earth than heaven. You are even older than us. But your current state is much better than ours. I'm very curious about how you did it." Mr. Vin laughed and said, "Saying that might make me live a few more years. Why are you two worrying? It's just that I've been taken care of better by my children and grandchildren. There's no such thing as longevity." Hearing the word longevity, Ma Don and Vong Chinhua became even more suspicious. Ma Don quickly asked Mr. Vin, "Don't joke with us anymore. Anyone with eyes can see your state. You don't look like someone over 100 years old at all. In fact, you could even say you look much younger." After saying this, Ma Don and Vong Chinhua fell silent. Mr. Vin sighed then, "Anyway, you two are also the best friends of the Vin family. I won't hide it anymore. Actually, recently I have been in contact with a secret life project laboratory. Currently they only serve the elites in the field. Moreover, their main project is prolonging life." Hearing that it was about prolonging life, Ma Don and Vong Chinhua were shocked. Mr. Vin continued, "But this laboratory is very secret and has strict checks." Vong Chinhua quickly asked, "Mr. Vin, don't know if we can follow you to benefit?" Mr. Vin looked embarrassed as Ma Don and Vong Chinhua both pleaded with him at once. Mr. Vin said, "All right then, since both of you already know, but whether it can be done or not still depends on whether both of you have the ability or not." After Ma Don and Vong Chinhua left, the man next to Mr. Vin said, "Although Mr. Vong looks robust and comfortable, he has been observing carefully since he walked in. After you mentioned the pill, his reaction was very decisive. This is not a momentary impulse, but absolute trust in what you said. Mr. Vin laughed and said, the pills Mr. Lee gave me are genuine and can prolong life. I am sure they will scramble for it. They have everything, so naturally they are more attached to the world than ordinary people. The Tran brothers have completed their new task and found the high-tech development research area that Mr. Lee needs. This place is located in the south of the city center with convenient transportation, next to the Biomedical Information Bureau. Mr. Lee was very satisfied and turned around to praise the two. Tran Van Ben bowed his head and said, "You're too kind, it's an honor for us brothers to contribute a little strength to the club." Mr. Lee smiled. Then, the brothers' phones rang, their new task was completed, and they got 1,200 accumulated points and successfully became first-level members. The Tran brothers were very excited. A rookie task could be upgraded to a member. We can buy a year of life now. At this time, Mr. Lee congratulated the two but hoped that they would strive for higher accumulated points in the future. Tran Van Ben said, "Okay, rest assured, I guarantee I will try my best." Mr. Lee was satisfied. Then the two brothers said goodbye. As soon as they went out, they ran into Ms. Du. Tran Van Ben saw her and felt very familiar. He asked his brother, "Hasn't that girl been on TV before?" Tran Van Ben said, "Yes, she is Ms. Du." Tran Van was shocked. Does this Mr. Lee have such a wide network? At this time, in the office, Ms. Du told Mr. Lee that it seems that the research area is progressing very smoothly. Mr. Lee said, "Yes, the Tran brothers have given us a big gift for our development." Ms. Du looked very happy today. "Do you have any good news?" Ms. Du nodded her head. "Mr. Vin said he would bring some people to meet you." Mr. Lee laughed and said, "Mr. Vin works too fast." Ms. Du suggested, "According to our expanding development, I think we should consider building a secret base abroad." Mr. Lee laughed. "Ms. Du must be good at reading people's minds?" The projects of Lab 1 and Lab 2 are progressing smoothly. Ku Dung and Nan Quan have started writing speeches for the elixir manufacturing project. At the same time, they have started to establish the Elixir Pharmaceutical Limited Company and Elixir Biotech Company. In addition to this, they are also preparing to expand the Elixir Biotech Group abroad. The third nano-sized physics lab has been completed under Professor Anthony's leadership. The company has been established one after another. The club will develop rapidly. Mr. Lee wants Mr. Vin to be a representative to recruit members. At present this policy is quite effective, but we have to speed up in other areas. Once we start developing abroad, many difficulties and pressures will appear. But with talented people by our side, the development of the club is just a matter of time. Now what Mr. Lee lacks most is time. Mr. Lee sighed. "It seems I have to continue looking for customers, try to fill up the time warehouse because I need it for my new ability development." Mr. Lee started buying time. Just now a girl was waiting for Mr. Lee. Because of her extravagant spending she is heavily in debt, so she made an appointment with Mr. Lee here. At this point Mr. Lee came over. "The message was sent by me. I came to meet you." Seeing how handsome Mr. Lee was, the girl was smitten. It wasn't until Mr. Lee said he was buying time that she suddenly sobered up and hurriedly asked, "What do you want to buy?" Mr. Lee felt helpless. It was another person who knew nothing. "It seems that the old trick is the most effective," he said, taking out his watch and using the time ability around him to stop it immediately. Then, Mr. Lee displayed the girl's information. Trong Tin, 22 years old, remaining lifespan is 56 years, 11 months, and 23 days. Seeing her lifespan, Trong Tin was shocked. When Mr. Lee saw this, he said, "Still don't understand?" "Ms. Trong, you can exchange your life for money under the allure of money." Trong Tin quickly completed the transaction with Mr. Lee. After the transaction ended, she sat on the ground helplessly. "Was my life just taken away like that?" At this time, Mr. Lee said, "This reaction is normal. This helplessness only happens in a moment, don't worry." According to what was said, 3 years of time is worth 990,000 yuan. There's no way this card is yours now. Trong Tin immediately snatched the card from Mr. Lee's hand. Looking incredulous, Mr. Lee reminded her behind her back, what you sold is your life, so your current state is what you will look like 3 years from now. But Trong Tin didn't listen. She felt it was just 3 years. She was still so young. She could pay off all her debts and save some money. She could even have several plastic surgeries to make up for the time. Indeed, it's a bargain. Look at her like this. Mr. Lee felt helpless. Then he left. Recently, every night, Mr. Lee was taken by Manhwa to overlook the entire city. This city has too many people troubled by money. Mr. Lee selected trading targets from thousands of people, helping some people with excessive family burdens and also making some people sink into ambition. But Mr. Lee didn't care. Time was what he traded. It had no good or bad attributes. Mr. Lee felt that time had bound him tightly. As he bought more and more time, his body also changed. Now his remaining lifespan is over 981 years. Even if I do nothing now and live leisurely like a fish, I can still live for over 981 years. Thinking about this, Mr. Lee laughed. Thinking about it makes me feel bored to death. I might as well spend my time clashing with others. Mr. Lee wanted to personally go to that optimized world and witness its development with his own eyes. He wanted to become a true creator. He will become a god for 981 years. In 19 more years, it will be a full 1,000 years. The ability of time now seemed almost like a part of him. Mr. Lee could feel it clearly that when he accumulated enough 1,000 years of time, there would be some new ability appearing in him. What would it be? Mr. Lee looked forward to it very much. Manhwa saw that something was wrong with Mr. Lee and asked, "What's wrong?" Mr. Lee said, "Nothing, just feeling the recent changes in us." Manhwa was silent for a while, then said, "Thank you. A useless person who couldn't live long like me would never have thought that I could be like today." Mr. Lee interrupted him, "Don't think too much about it, just follow me." Mr. Lee sighed, "Now is a critical moment for the club and you are my backbone." At this point his phone rang announcing that his colleague Lu Jung was about to get married. Mr. Lee looked at this news and was very happy, thinking about when the Chow family investigated him. Luckily he had him secretly inform him in advance. Originally wanted to finish this batch of work then find him to talk. It seems that he is living well now, even if he goes once to repay his kindness last time. Moreover, it has been a long time since he enjoyed the life of ordinary people. To thank Lu Jung for his help last time, Mr. Lee accepted his invitation to attend the colleague gathering. Mr. Lee congratulated Lu Jung. Seeing Mr. Lee's extraordinary temperament, Lu Jung was surprised and said, "Mr. Lee, you look radiant. Where did you make your fortune?" Mr. Lee pushed his glasses and said, "As always, just turning time into money." Then, Lu Duong introduced his future wife to him. After the greetings, Mr. Lee went into the room first. Xiao Song looked at Mr. Lee and thought he was very handsome. After everyone had a few drinks together, another hand appeared next to Mr. Lee. It turned out that a female colleague noticed Mr. Lee's change. At this point, Manager Lam asked Mr. Lee. At first, he didn't say anything and resigned. "What are you doing exactly?" Mr. Lee smirked. "Long time no see, Manager Lam. Now I'm doing a small business, basically in the service industry." Manager Lam looked down on him. "Surely, you can't surpass us office workers." Initially, Lu Duong followed him to learn the trade for a while. "When will you pull him to start a business together?" Hearing him say this, Mr. Lee felt that this guy was still useless. Then he laughed and replied, "Can you compare with me? We do business like this without specific hours. Following me is the safest." Seeing that Mr. Lee is living well now, Manager Lam thought to himself that Mr. Lee was originally a useless person, but today he is dressed so luxuriously, he must have done something illegal. "Wait until after the investigation, I have to report it." The gathering quickly ended. Seeing that Manager Lam had been drinking, Lu Duong wanted to accompany him for a while. Manager Lam boasted, "My new BMW will come to pick me up as soon as I tell my wife." This made Lu Duong very embarrassed. Seeing that Mr. Lee hadn't left yet, Manager Lam said, "Do you need me to give you a ride?" Mr. Lee said he didn't need it and could take a taxi. Seeing that Mr. Lee didn't have a car, Manager Lam laughed triumphantly. "Go ahead and show off in front of me." At this point, his phone rang. After answering it, his face changed immediately. It turned out that his wife had hit a Rolls-Royce. Lu Duong said, "Is it serious? Let's go and see together so that my sister-in-law won't suffer." Mr. Lee also intended to go to the scene. Everyone was shocked to see Manager Lam in such a miserable state sitting on the ground while his wife was crying and saying, "I told you I can't drive, but you insisted on me coming here. What should we do now?" Manager Lam could only sell his house as he still owed money for the house and car loans. His life was over at this point. The owner of the car came over with a relaxed face saying it's just a broken car and as long as no one is hurt it's fine. Seeing the owner's gracious attitude gave the couple some hope. The wife excitedly said, "I'm really sorry, sir, it was my carelessness this time." The owner chuckled and said, "It's okay, you didn't do it on purpose and everyone has their difficulties in life anyway. Anyway, your attitude is good, so just compensate according to the old price." These words made the couple desperate. Seeing their desperate expressions, the owner laughed out loud. He then listed many compensation fees, such as 140,000 yuan for the broken front grille, 500,000 for the headlights, 200,000 for the damaged insurance cover, not including various labor repair costs. Then, he mocked them, saying, Lu Duong asked, "Excuse me, among you, who can advance money first? What's the use of having many people? A bunch of poor people dared to show off in front of me, but I have a way to help you, which is to kowtow to me. Each kowtow will reduce 1,000 yuan for you. Count it anyway. For poor people like you, face is not the most important thing. If you feel embarrassed, then let me borrow your wife for one night." Manager Lam couldn't stand it anymore and rushed up to risk his life with him, but ended up getting hit by him. The car owner disdainfully said, "Didn't you hear what I do for a living? A shrimp like you dares to lay a hand on me. Now I give you two choices, one is to pay compensation, the other is to let me sleep with your wife. If I don't get a satisfactory result today, whoever I hit, don't think about escaping." Hearing him say this, Lu Duong's colleagues panicked at this point. A voice rang out from behind, "Mr. Lee, come out and say I'll compensate for you." Seeing that the person who spoke was Mr. Lee, his colleagues couldn't believe it. "He's crazy." The car owner disdainfully said, "Is there someone who dares to stand up? I warn you not to joke. What I have the most is people." Mr. Lee laughed and said, "Don't worry, when he insulted my colleague, I had already called someone to prepare the money. This time we just talk." After finishing speaking, Banhao took off his coat and walked over. The car owner saw this and was not panicked at all. Banhao didn't say anything and walked straight up and kicked him. A second later, the car owner was beaten up by Banhao. He hit the car hard and spat out some tomato sauce. Mr. Lee looked at him coldly while his colleagues were amazed. At this point, the car owner was still threatening, but Banhao didn't care. He kicked straight into his face and the car owner lay helplessly on the ground continuing to speak. Banhao kicked him in the face again and finally the car owner started begging for mercy in fear. But Banhao didn't stop at all and kept punching his face with cries of pain filling the scene until the opponent was beaten up and Mr. Lee called Banhao to stop. Then he threw a bank card at him saying, "The money in here is enough for you to buy a new car, use the rest to buy some breath mints because your breath stinks too much. Also, I advise you not to insult my colleagues again, here's my business card. I'm ready to meet you anytime." Then Mr. Lee turned around and said, "Okay, the matter has been resolved." Mr. Lee was suddenly stunned because his colleagues' eyes were full of fear looking at Lu Duong's scared face. Mr. Lee called his name and Lu Duong answered in panic, backing away looking at his terrified brothers. Then Mr. Lee helplessly left with Banhao. At this point Banhao said, were all those people today your acquaintances? Didn't expect to encounter this incident. That hateful guy is really a worm that spoils the soup. Mr. Lee said after this incident, I'm afraid I won't see them anymore. Manhwa was puzzled, didn't you just help them? Mr. Lee explained, didn't you see their eyes then? We used to be one kind of people, all nameless little people with many topics to talk about, but now there's a wall between us which is fear and caution. But today's party made Mr. Lee quite happy. It's a pity that we can't meet again. Suddenly Mr. Lee smelled danger and broke out in a cold sweat. It seems that someone was secretly affecting his lifespan, whether it was assassination or disaster. At this point Mr. Lee felt as if danger was coming from that direction. Mr. Lee immediately told Manhwa, someone is targeting us. Mr. Lee took out his watch and used his ability to accelerate time. Manhwa went to warn a bit. Very quickly after that, he found the attacker. He immediately went in front of him and punched him straight in the face. The man pulled out his gun and kept pulling the trigger. Manhwa easily dodged, then stabbed him with a knife, making him fall on the spot. After solving the trouble, Manhwa got in the car and said to Mr. Lee, we have to keep him alive. What about this attack? Mr. Lee guessed that the person on the police side, from some perspective, now we are also doing business openly, we cannot directly confront them. Hopefully there will be no second exploration. Anyway, on the surface it is also cooperation to know when to stop. The next day, in some office, the girl said that yesterday's mission failed. Lu Triandong was shocked. Did anyone survive and come back? The girl said that she was stabbed in the shoulder a few times. The support team came to handle it in time, temporarily not life-threatening. Lu Triandong angrily slammed the table. The girl continued. Sun Mao also reported last night, he met someone who was not human-like. Lu Triandong could not believe it. Sun Mao had recorded the whole process and the scene was very clear, but the speed of that person was too fast. Sun Mao hadn't reacted yet and was injured. Then he fired several shots in a row, but that person easily dodged. In the end, Sun Mao was injured in the shoulder. After watching the video, Lu Triandong was scared. This mission will definitely shock those above. Although our superiors asked us to just monitor it, like a madman like that, if I don't explore it, how can I feel at ease? This action is just an exploration and can only be carried out with the tacit approval of the leaders above. Is it an exploration? If successful, there will be a big harvest. If it fails, you have to take responsibility yourself. End of words. Someone is coming outside. The notice from above has arrived. Lu Triandong said, I understand. I will explain to those above myself. This mission is as predicted by experts. We really have the ability to detect danger before under his control of time. We cannot act. The man next to him said, but fortunately it seems that he is not a violent person. He discovered our intention to explore and therefore did not intend to kill when fighting back. This time I lost too much. Lu Triandong turned around and said, my previous negligence was because he was still alive. Today my superiors gave me a task and they will ask if I fail. I understand that my contact with him will lead to dangerous consequences later on. Like this time it can be regarded as exploring part of the work and someone has to do it and I am just a sacrifice. This man is Mr. Lee's first customer. He had traded with Mr. Lee twice before, once a year ago and once 5 years ago. In just half a year he had aged 6 years. Just now he walked on the road smoking a cigarette when a girl pointed at him and said, there is a homeless uncle here. Uncle Dang Van doesn't care about them, but looking at his business card in his hand it seems he has made up his mind about something. Then he called, hello, may I ask if this is Mr. Lee? I am Uncle Dang Van, do you still remember me? Hearing a familiar voice Mr. Lee smiled, of course, you are my regular customer, so do you need money again Uncle Dang Van? Mr. Lee made an appointment with him at the old place before hanging up. Mr. Lee showed a smug expression, I knew there would be this day. Then he said to Manhwa, let's go do a deal. Uncle Dang Van had been waiting here for a long time. Mr. Lee said to him, I knew you would come to find me again. Uncle Dang Van immediately shook hands with Mr. Lee and said, it's been so long since we met, you're still the same. Mr. Lee looked up and said, Uncle Dang, looking at your appearance now, are you sure of money again? If I remember correctly, this is our third meeting, right? So how much time do you want to sell me this time? Uncle Dang Van sweated coldly and said, can I ask how much lifespan I have left? Seeing this, Mr. Lee said, I thought you weren't afraid of anything. After saying that, he showed Uncle Dang Van his remaining lifespan. Seeing that there were still more than 50 years left, Uncle Dang Van was very happy. It seems I can still live carefree for more than 50 years, it's really a money-making tool, Mr. Lee said. It seems you haven't been doing well recently, Uncle Dang Van said. We started an internship, but the job isn't going well. I think the salary they pay is too low, and they criticize me for not having experience. I'm even more angry when I think about being publicly humiliated by them. So you decided not to work for others anymore and want to start your own business, Mr. Lee smiled. A man with foresight. At this point, Uncle Dang Van continued, I need a large sum of money to start a business. Then he said to Mr. Lee, Mr. Lee, you still agree to help me, right? Mr. Lee calmly said, there is no help between us, only business. What I have most is money, how much do you want to exchange? Hearing Mr. Lee say this, Uncle Dang Van hesitated and then said, then 4 years. Mr. Lee said okay, now we will use the price of 300,000 yuan a year to proceed with the transaction. Uncle Dang Van said, I understand. Mr. Lee took out his watch and said, so 4 years of your lifespan will be taken back by me, the transaction is complete. Uncle Dang Van happily left. Mr. Lee looked at his departing back and felt amused. We will definitely meet again, Uncle Dang Van, this time I have to thank you. After this transaction, Mr. Lee's goal of having 1,000 years of time was completed. After getting the desired time, Mr. Lee gradually felt changes in his body. It was just like before. He felt his abilities were gradually changing, it felt like a part of his body.